My name is Coach Tina Griffith and I'm with the WV rowing team. And I'm just here today to tell you guys a little about rowing. Most people don't even know that we have rowing here at WVU, and it's actually a really cool sport. One of the things that's interesting about rowing just in general is that it was the first intercollegiate competition that happened back in the 1850s against Harvard and Yale. Rowing is a training sport, so you can compare it to something like swimming or cross country, where you don't have necessarily skill sets or plays or different things like that, but you just train consistently. It's a very high expenditure sport, so it's very intense. We have races, and we have them in the fall and in the spring. The fall is our minor season, and during that time we do distance races. Those ones are set up where they'll have one crew go at a time, and they'll send the next crew after them, and basically you try to catch and pass the other crews in front of you. Whereas in the spring, when we do our sprint races, which are about 2,000 meters, it's more like a track event, and where you line up in lanes about 6 across, and they'll send everybody off at the same time. You row the 2K, which is approximately 1.2 miles, and you'll have heats and move on from there to go to finals like a track meet. A lot of people, think, oh, rowing, and we get that all the time, but it's actually a leg-driven sport. Rowing happens no matter the weather, as long as it's not dangerous for the athletes. So if it's raining, we're rowing. If it's snowing, we're rowing. Okay? If it's really hot out, if it's really cold out, it doesn't matter, as long as it's safe or out on the water. So, it makes it very interesting, and it's mentally challenging sometimes just as much as it is physically challenging dealing with the weather. Personally, I feel that rowing is the ultimate team sport. When you're out in the boat, you have to do exactly like the person in front of you, and then all 8 people in that boat have to do exactly the same thing. You can't be off by an inch. You can't be off by a second. You're only as strong as the slowest person in your group. So it really is, to me, the epitome of what a team sport is.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Dibbling.
And I'm Nicole Dibbling.
And we are both juniors on West Virginia University's women's rowing team. And today we are going to give you a little rundown on kind of rowing 101, some of the basic equipment that we use every day and the terminology that we use on our practices and when we're racing as well.
Yeah, so in slings right here we have a Vespoli Double, which is a boat meant for 2 people. It's one of 4 doubles that our team owns. This boat specifically is meant for 2 people, and it's set up for sculling, which means you have 2 oars, 1 oar per each hand. This boat, I don't know how it shows up on camera, but it's approximately 30 feet long. It's made of carbon fiber, which is extremely lightweight, but also really strong.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we have here, but before we start actually describing some of the equipment in the boat, it's kind of essential to learn some of the terminology that we use in the sport of rowing, but then also boating as well. So if you've ever been around boating before, some of these terms might be familiar, but if not, these are going to sound kind of new. So instead of saying the front of the boat or the back of the boat, we actually refer to it as bow and stern. So the front of the boat, which is down this way, is called the bow, and then the back of the boat, which is down towards the camera, is actually the stern. And rowing, it's kind of weird because in the boat, rowers are actually sitting backwards. So when the boat is moving that way, rowers will be facing this way and facing the stern. So the bow is behind us. And then also we have, instead of the right side of the boat and the left side of the boat, we have port and starboard. So since we're sitting in the boat like this, port will be on the right side and starboard would be on the left. And then port and starboard sometimes have color codes as well. So port is red and starboard is green.
So now that we know more of the directional side of rowing, we can look at the different parts of a boat and kind of the universal parts that you would find shell to shell. In this boat specifically, there's 5 different things that you'd find in every boat. The foot stretcher, the seat, the rigger, the oarlock, and then the oar. Well, normally when people look in a boat for the first time, there's 2 things that they find kind of odd that they didn't expect. 1, that there's permanent shoes in the boat, and then 2, that the seat is actually on wheels and slides back and forth. This is so that you can make the sport of rowing more of a leg-based sport rather than all in the arms. So in this boat specifically, the first thing is the permanent shoes. This is part of the equipment that's called the foot stretcher, also back there. So the foot stretcher is where you strap your feet into and is what you push against to get the power from the stroke. The seat is kind of self-explanatory, but it's on a sliding track that you then push back and forth with your legs come back and the seat comes back, and it's on a track so that as the boat gets picked up overhead, it doesn't fall off. The rigger is the metal structure that's in front of each rower. In this boat specifically, it's set up for sculling, so the metal structure is winged out to each side of the boat, rather than if it's sweep, it would only be rigged out to one side of the boat. And it's winged out to the side that as you twist to row, you twist out towards the rigger. On the rigger itself, out here is called the Orlock. The Orlock actually comes untwisted, which you then would open, put the oar in, twist close, and then lock it on the dock. Doing this essentially creates a lever with the oar, so that as you're pulling, it's creating a lever, you're pulling, it's creating a force on the oar, which then pushes the boat that way forward down the river.
Since this is a sculling boat, the oars that we use are slightly smaller and shorter, because in sculling you actually have 2 oars, so you have 1 in each hand. So in order to actually hold them, they have to be a little smaller than sweep oars. That's essentially all of the equipment in the boat. All of the boats tend to have that same basic 5 parts, but obviously you might be wondering, how do we go from a boat sitting up in slings to actually going out in the river and racing down a race course? And that honestly depends basically on the rowers themselves to take it from just a piece of equipment to a successful team racing. And unlike a lot of different sports, we don't necessarily have positions like football or basketball would, but we have seat numbers. So in rowing, actually, each seat in the boat, so whether you have this spot or this spot, have a number associated with it. And in this boat, since there's only 2 seats, it's a little weird, but in the bigger boats, like you would have maybe seen in the boathouse, the 4s or the 8s, there's 8 people rowing in a boat. So it's really essential to know where you're sitting in the boat and what your responsibilities are. The farthest bow seat is normally referred to as bow seat, and then the farthest stern seat is called stroke seat. And this is kind of where we get into the responsibilities of each seat. So stroke seat is the one responsible for setting the rhythm of the boat and kind of the pace that everyone else has to follow. So if you've ever seen rowing on TV before, or maybe in person before, the one thing you'd probably notice are that the faster crews are typically the ones that are in rhythm and in time with each other. And that's where each seat really has a responsibility to follow the person in front of them. So for stroke seat, they're the one in charge of setting the pace, but then everyone farther down the boat has to follow the girl in front of them. So whether that's actually looking at the person in front of them or looking out, depending on what side you row, it's really about matching up every single aspect of the sport and every single aspect of the stroke that makes our crew successful.
Yeah, so when rhythm of a boat transfers from sweep boats to sculling boats, from larger boats to smaller boats, one thing that separates them is who steers. In smaller boats like this one, all of the steering responsibilities go to whoever is sitting in bow seat. There is no really rudder underneath the boat to steer. All you have to do is steer with pressure. Whether it's looking at visual cues from where you were before, so looking at land behind you, looking to see where the stern of the boat is in relationship to land, or whether you're actually turning around and looking at land to make sure you're going straight and definitely not going to hit anything. All of that responsibility goes to bow seat. The steering in this boat is all in bow seat. The steering in the larger boats relies on a position called the coxswain. Whether it's in a 4 or an 8, the position of the coxswain can either be in the bow of the boat or the stern of the boat. There's actually a little seat for them to sit. So the coxswain in these boats is responsible for steering, and then they're also responsible for any verbal cues, whether it's motivation or strategic calls.
So that's essentially all the rowing terminology and the different parts of the boat that I feel like anyone would really want to know. But now you know a little bit about what we do on a daily basis. We take these boats, we go out on them on every day, which is really awesome to be able to do on campus. And then we race in the spring at the Big 12 Championships with the end goal of obviously doing well.
We just want to say thank you to the Mountaineer Athletic Club for all of your support. I definitely could not have gotten an education as good as this in mechanical and aerospace engineering without your support. It's meant a the world to me to come to West Virginia University and get this great of an education.
Yeah, without your support, really our education and our collegiate experience wouldn't really be the same. Your support has really allowed us to make the most of our time on campus, from just being able to compete in rowing, being able to join things like the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, being able to compete in rowing, and I'm also an engineering major, so being able to combine that with all of that would not be possible without your support and your, I guess, really belief in our program. So for that, we just want to say thank you. It really means the world to us. So I hope you guys enjoyed getting a little inside look at West Virginia University's women's rowing team, and hopefully next year we can see some of you out on the water with us. But until then, thanks for watching, and let's go Mountaineers.